Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing the top 10 Kickstarters of the month. And before I get started, I do have some friend Kickstarters, some Kickstarters of our own. Also, I do Kickstarter consulting, so if you want to DM me or email me and you want to improve your game on Kickstarter from a PR angle, definitely check that out. But let's start with some Kickstarters here. My business partner Phil has a Kickstarter, Haunting. It's about a young boy as ghosts following him. He does not want to deal with it, so he doesn't. This is the 7th issue in the series. One of my favorite titles, and also this issue in particular has a lot of great action, has some queer romance as well, so it kind of has it all. So go check that one out. Now talking about a book that we co-wrote, and that is Nightmare in Wonderland. It's about a queen version of Sleeping Beauty who has an ex, Alice, who's an assassin from Alice in Wonderland, and they get stuck in a nightmare version of Wonderland. In this issue, we get to actually see them in that nightmare version of Wonderland as they have to also deal with their personal woes of their relationship. Moving on to the next book here, supernatural book, and that's Fangers issue 1 if you're looking for more sexy titles. Bad Bug does a wonderful job at those sexy titles and also getting a lot of great names on the books too. We might be a little biased as one of those names on one of their titles. But this one really fascinated me. It has to do with this vampire group of people who have now human tourists trying to infiltrate their community and what happens to the vampires when that happens. And again, it's also a sexy book, so you kind of have it all. Moving on to the last friend Kickstarter, and then we'll move on to our top 10, and that is Bixby, Grant, Fangs, and Brimstone. This is a supernatural noir story, kind of has like a cartoony vibe as well. I like a good noir storyline if you could kind of have a Halloween spirit to it as well, especially for the timing. I think that's a great angle on a genre that's kind of lasted for ever. So how do you reinvent the genre? I feel like this is a great way to do that. Now we're moving on to number 10, which number 10 for me is another vampire book, Vampires on Mars issues 1 through 2. This has to do with a vampire who fights a range of people like billionaires and astronauts. I'm always impressed with the thumbnails for this book in particular, and I just really like the style of the book. And again, it's kind of an out there premise of the different characters that a vampire normally doesn't get to interact with. Number 9 is Jordan Hart's Ripple Effect, the Deluxe Edition. This is ran by Fanbase Press, which is a really great website who has honestly done so much for the indie community, from Kickstarters to the direct market. And I'm really glad that they're putting their feet into Kickstarter with a series that I feel like has a really interesting premise of this character that is dealing with type 1 diabetes, something I've never really gotten to see through comic books. So I think it's an interesting story of maybe something that we can all learn more about. Actually, my mom's a pharmacist and does a lot with diabetes stuff, so it'll be interesting to see through a comic how they perceive that. So moving on to number 8, which is Ekos. I believe that's how you pronounce the title, and that's volume 1. It's honestly one of the biggest comics of the year, and that's how they're promoting it, because one of the creators of the MCU is behind this. It already has like $200,000 in like 2 days. Aspen Comics is behind it, which is also a big indie company for the past 20 years that made some really big titles in the indie market, especially in the 90s with Fathom. So honestly, it's a very interesting move for Kickstarter, and I want to see what type of eyes go onto the platform because of the MCU fans to the Aspen fans, and what type of story this is going to be. I feel like we're in a renaissance of indie books, and I'm glad we're seeing that bleeding through for Kickstarter, especially indie books from big names that have been around for decades, like Ghost Machine is making and Robert Kirkman is making these big moves in the direct market. So I want to see that through Kickstarter as well. So moving on to number 7, I don't think I'm going to pronounce this right, but it's ITADAKIMASU, which is a horror manga omnibus, and it's all about like body horror. I feel like a lot of the manga stuff that I've seen on Kickstarter, which I love, is the queer story. So it's really cool to see a different genre being explored through manga, and just in general seeing more manga titles on the platform. Moving on to number 6, which is Pulp Girls Dust Bunny 1. This is a sci-fi western that takes place post global warming, and this also has a wonderful artist, which I mentioned before with Haunting. Mao is the Haunting artist, and also the artist for this title, and just does a wonderful job, especially with their colors, to kind of have this anime feel with their action sequences that work really well and in different ways in Haunting and this book, Pulp Girls. So go check that one out. Moving on to number 5, OXYMORON, Killing Time. This is about a contradicting killer who goes through time travel to use their weird perspective on life to capture these historical villains. And the artwork really captured me for this one. I was like, all right, cool premise. Oxymoron. Have not really seen that with comic books and a superhero, or at least an anti-hero. And moving on to number 4, which is ILLuminati, a thriller where hip-hop and comics collide. It's pretty much exactly what it's telling you in that title, which is what hooked me. Hip-hop has had such a big history and ties to comic books. There's plenty of songs and hip-hop artists that have either read comic books, have been part of creating comic books, or have referenced comics. So it's really cool to see kind of the reverse, where we get to see comics embrace hip-hop and seeing a supernatural story with that. And that's ran by AWA, which has they've done plenty of Kickstarters and also done a lot through the direct market. Moving on to number 3, which is Trapped. This is a story about poker. What's funny about this is I feel like a lot of comics, you'll have a story about card games, and that's really just the secondary story. It's like, okay, there's a story that so happens to have card games part of it. This seems like it's the main story, which has to do with like poker and gambling. So I'm like, okay, I'm really excited to see this heist poker story. I think it's just a really cool thing to focus on, and a unique lens for this to make this comic stand out. Moving on to number 2, which is Council Wars issue 1. This is the history of gaming and how we got to see, okay, who's gonna win, PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo, and getting to see that war through robots in this comic book. So I think it's a cool way to tell something that actually happened in entertainment history through comics in an action-y way. So that's why it's my number 2. Moving on to number 1, which is Unseen, Unheard, a Disability and Neurodivergent Comic Anthology. I'm glad to see more anthologies on Kickstarter. I think they are the backbone of Kickstarter and bringing the community together, and to see such an important story and collection of stories and point of view with this disability storyline and anthology, I think is really important. And there's some really great creators behind this as well, so go check it out. I again think there has to be more anthologies on Kickstarter. I'm glad that we're seeing a little bit more, and especially with just some wonderful topics that I think we all can learn more about. So that's why that's my number 1 pick. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite books of the month were for Kickstarter, and hopefully you guys enjoyed. Bye.